There we go. We're recording. Fantastic. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad that you could be here tonight. It's amazing to see so many of you here. We've got 58 people on at the moment, and we've got over 110 registered. So I expect more people will pop in as they can. 8 o'clock can be a bit of an interesting time of night, can't it? Okay, so I don't have all the answers to how to fix violent behaviour. I just want to say that right at the very start. What I want to talk about tonight is how we can respond to violent behaviour. So let's have a look at these slides, shall we? So welcome. I want you to notice the title of the webinar. It's responding to violent behaviour, not reacting. So we're going to talk about a starting point. We're going to talk about the success issue. We're going to talk about why kids do get violent, how to respond, and what needs to change. So what I hope is from tonight, you'll go away with your own little personal action plan, either in how you're going to respond to children differently if you're a teacher or a support worker or a therapist, or for a parent that you might have a couple of things that you're going to experiment with and see if it creates a difference. So remember that everything is an experiment and it may or may not work. The information I'm giving tonight is general in nature. So I don't actually, I'm not targeting any one person, and this information isn't specifically for your child. So before we begin to look at violent behaviour, we've got to rule out the biological. This is absolutely critical. We've got to check out whether there's gut issues involved. We had one little lad that was just losing it all of the time, and then we discovered he was a celiac, and that he still had autism, but he was much more settled when we worked that out. Do they have hay fever? Are they constantly just overwhelmed by congestion in their face, and is just everything too much all of the time? Have you checked their eyesight? Have you checked their hearing? Have you had full blood tests done? Glucose, vitamin D, iron, sleep studies? Have you had chromosome testing done? I know I've talked about this before, but I'm just going to touch on it again. We have this umbrella that we call autism now, but often if you do the chromosome disorder screening, you actually find that there is a chromosome disorder that has some other health implications attached. So I always talk about my grandson, so I'll talk about him now. He's 13 and a half. He actually has a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder and autism, both of which he meets the criteria for, absolutely 100%, but he does have a 12p 13.33 duplication, and that means that he has, as part of that chromosome disorder, all of the behaviours that are consistent with RAD, all of the behaviours that are consistent with autism, but do you know what? He has a couple of other things as well. So we do need to look out for hypothyroidism and thyroid issues. We have to look out, he's missing some adult teeth, he's got a heart murmur, and there's other implications that we have to consider as well. And the chromosome testing is getting better and better all of the time. And if we weren't aware that he actually had a chromosome disorder, we wouldn't be aware of all these other potential either are happening now health implications, or the other things that actually come with that chromosome disorder. And I would suggest that maybe in 10 years or so, that chromosome disorders will be much more well known, and that umbrella of autism will be broken into chromosome disorders rather than just autism. Now, remembering tonight that there's the Q&A, and that Karen monitors the Q&A really closely, and Karen has this little signal that she gives me that she doesn't even know she gives me whenever she needs to ask a question. So if you see Karen look up and look straight at me, I know that she's got a question. So we've got a really good system worked out, and I try and watch out for that. So please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. Say where you're from in the chat, and you can all be chatting with each other in the chat. That's fine. All right. So we're going to look at school. We're going to look at home. We're going to look at some different situations. So I'm going to jump on my big hobby horse. Often children go to school and they can't be successful right from the minute they walk in the door, because the tasks that are presented to them, they just cannot be successful. I was in a school the other day where I was going in to observe this little fella who's got extreme behaviour issues. I walked in, and it's a school that I know well and that know me well, and this little fella, he had an A4 piece of paper and like 20 words down the side, and then there were like 3 columns. And his writing, is still pretty big. And the teacher said, you only have to do 3 words, mate. You don't have to do the whole 20. But he actually couldn't even fit his writing in the little squares. So he actually cracked the shits big time, screwed up the paper and threw it. And the teacher was like, have to put up with this all of the time. And so, not in front of the other kids, but then later we had a conversation, and I said, you actually gave him no option. You gave him no option at all except for to respond in that way, because you were shaming him. If you only want him, or you know he can only do 3 words, give him a sheet with only 3 words on it, and make the spaces where he has to write a size that his writing can fit in, so that he can actually be successful. So you shame him by showing him that he actually can't write at the size you require, and you shame him by saying he only has to do 3 because he's faced with this failure every time he has to address a task. So we have children becoming really demand avoidant in a classroom because they're presented with a lack of success at every step of the way. So just recently we had the English teacher's laptop smashed at a school because the work that was being given to the child they couldn't be successful with. And so they had been going to this class for 2 years. They'd had the same English teacher 2 years in a row, and they just could not tolerate this teacher shaming them every time they went into that classroom. Now, great school, understands differentiation, understands the difference between adaptation, modification, and differentiation, but just didn't get it. So for a lot of our kids who have violent behaviour, whether it's at school or at home, it is related to issues at school. Sometimes it is really, really difficult to get a school to understand differentiation and how it's different from modification. Next week, I'm actually lecturing at ACU to the second year education students on the difference between adaptation, modification, and differentiation, because they're just not getting it. So adaptation is where you adapt the work or you adapt with tools. Modification is where you reduce the requirement, so you modify the task. And differentiation is where you actually identify where the child is up to academically and developmentally. You know exactly where they are. You understand the scope and the sequence of their learning, and you provide them with a task that is developmentally and age appropriate, and you have a plan about how you're going to get them to the next level. So if you're modifying and just saying, oh, you only have to do 3 words, there is no plan about how that child is going to learn the other 17 words. Oops, my table just went up. There's no scope and sequence. So if that child is only doing those 3 words, they're not learning all the other 17, and there is no plan about how they're going to learn the other 17. So modification is not helpful to the child, it only helps the teacher. It actually shames the child and pushes them back into a corner where they come out fighting. Now, lots of our kids hold themselves really tightly at school. They understand they're not allowed to lose it at school. But how many of them hit the car and then totally lose it? Kez, is there a question there?
There is. What if you have a teenager who won't go to school, becomes violent, and think now he's taller than me physically, abusive, and he won't listen?
Yeah. So he's had his time at school, possibly, just guessing, where the shame of not having work differentiated for him, whether it's that he could actually do it academically or not, or whether it was around his emotional capacity to do that work or not, he's a broken person because of the shame. And I think a really good starting point is sitting down and saying, oh my goodness, was this your experience at school? Is this what you went through? I am so sorry that happened to you. We need to see if we can work together to help you recover from this horrific trauma. And start a journey from there. It's not going to solve it overnight, okay? There's no quick fix. But it's certainly a place of recovery and a place to start a conversation. Is that helpful? I'm just so sorry you're going through that. That is just so crap.
I think it'd be quite scary, Bobbi, to have
just the unpredictability of it. And look, I know this stuff and I still can't get it right for Luca. Okay? Luca's the one that smashed the English teacher's laptop. That happened to us, like at the end of last term. It was dreadful. But the English teacher really hasn't got the differentiation sorted out. And I'm at the school every week trying to get it sorted, and they understand and they agree in principle, but getting the actual teachers to get it and not be overwhelmed by it is really, really tough. And I know there's some of you on this webinar whose kids aren't going to school because of the lack of differentiation. There's some of you there whose children only last year got their autism diagnoses, and they've suffered with that shame for years and years.
Okay, so we've got some, didn't know if I was muted then. We've got some comments, Bobbi. So interestingly, my child has been attending school as I'm an essential worker with a reduced number of students and workload and some freedoms at school. Their behaviours actually improved immediately after school with decreased meltdowns after school. Yeah.
So that's a really good indicator that a full classroom and the demand is just overwhelming.
Yeah. That first mum who said about their child being violent and what do you do, she said he's fallen through the cracks at school and has had no consequences at all. Last time he went to school was 6 months ago. Um, Another comment was my child would be so sweet at school and then lose it at home and
Yep.
put holes in the walls and attack us. The school probably thought I was crazy when I kept asking them for help.
And I think one of the things that you're going to have a resource now is you can say, can you please watch this webinar? And just learn about demand avoidance and why kids become demand avoidant, and that whole thing of not being able to let anybody see that they're not coping.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just horrible.
yeah. That last comment was from our beautiful Aisha. So she understands and gets it too.
Yeah.
David has made a comment. I think sometimes behaviours can almost be a phobia of larger group of children.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a way of avoiding it, isn't it? And it works because they can use their words and say, no, I don't want to go to class. I don't want to do maths. I don't want to go to class. And they actually aren't heard.
Mm,
And so they've actually got to escalate their behavior and escalate their behavior and escalate their behavior until they don't have to go to class.
yeah. Bobbi, there's just a few more comments.
Sure.
So Aisha's saying once she learnt about demand avoidance and the anxiety behind it, it's changed everything. Um, and someone's asked if you can explain demand avoidance.
I will indeed. I think it's about 8 slides on.
Yeah, I
So
thought
I'll
it
keep
might be.
going.
Yeah.
And look, we do actually have a webinar on the website that is just on demand avoidance, and we've got one that's just on school refusal.
Yep.
So they're there, they're free, download them.
Yep. Great idea. There's also just one more comment before you go on, just saying that the police has had to be called 3 times and just how distressing that is.
Oh, it's horrible because they don't know what to do either. I I was talking to a local policeman the other day. It's kind of a little bit off topic, but kind of not. And he was, we were talking about, you might remember a couple of webinars ago, we were talking about sexualized behaviour. And I, after that, had this big conversation with the police officer. And he said, and I said to him, you wouldn't like that if somebody did that to you, would you? And I said, oh, that's really problematic. And they were like, what? I said, because he might actually like it if somebody did it to him. And so sometimes, even when people are very aggressive and violent, and we try to shame them and say, you wouldn't like it if somebody spoke to you like that, would you? And maybe inside they're thinking, actually, I really wouldn't mind that. That would actually be really good. And I'll get to the reason why they wouldn't mind it in a minute. Okay, so let's look at home as well. We've got family relationships that can be messy and confusing. We've got sibling relationships that can be messy and confusing. We can have siblings with disabilities that mean our needs aren't getting met. There's family violence. It happens, so let's not pretend it doesn't. Mental health of kids and parents, exhaustion, COVID whiplash and fatigue. So there's been a 236% increase in calls to kids helpline. It just, the stats about kids not doing well and families not doing well have been insane. Just stress, family violence, mental health, ambulance call outs to teenagers melting down. The Ballarat based hospital PEDS ward at the moment is actually more like a youth mental health ward. It's just a bit full on. All right, what I want to talk to you about now is theory of mind. And this is an impairment that kids with autism have, kids with ADHD have, people with schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, and anxiety all suffer with either permanent impaired theory of mind or temporary impaired theory of mind because they're mentally unwell. So theory of mind is that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what they're feeling. But it's actually more than that. It's understanding how they might feel and then changing your own behavior. So when there's an impaired theory of mind, they can't imagine how their behavior might make somebody else feel. But it's much more than that. They don't actually experience empathy. They don't have an experience of empathy because they don't know what empathy is. You might say to them, I know how you feel. I understand. I can see how school might be hard for you. And you smile at them and you're gentle, and they might be going, you do not understand me. And they're going, yes, I do understand you. I truly do. And they're seeing you calm and regulated. And as adults and educators, we're actually trained to stay calm. And it's, we stay regulated. That helps them to calm down. Our brain's bigger than their brain. That helps them to chillax. We go through that whole process. But what they actually do, they poke the bear and they poke the bear and they poke the bear, and they melt down and they get angry and they get violent and they get in your face until you actually react in the same way. And then sometimes they'll even laugh at you once you're crying and you're a basket case rocking in the corner. And that can be the most horrifically terrifying thing, because then we go, oh my God, you're a sociopath. You're actually happy and laughing that I'm destroyed? That is not it at all. They are experiencing an intense sense of relief because they're actually seeing their level of distress mirrored in you, and that is the only way they experience empathy. And that is why they escalate their behavior and escalate their behavior and escalate their behavior. That is why they get more and more and more violent, is because you actually build walls higher and higher and higher and higher, and it takes longer and longer for you to lose it, for them to experience empathy. So it's about looking at different ways of helping them to understand empathy. Any questions or comments, Kes? I know this is hard stuff to be looking at and hearing.
Yeah. There's a couple of comments, but just on other.
No worries.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So there's a whole lot of processes that people go through in developing theory of mind. So there's a whole lot of stages. And so being able to identify where your child is at in these stages is really helpful, because then you can help them to deliberately and explicitly develop the skills to move to the next step. Now, what the research shows is that people with impaired theory of mind can learn the steps and learn how to respond appropriately. But it's a learnt skill. It's never intuitive in the same way as it is for somebody who's neurotypical. But the skills of understanding theory of mind can be taught. So they can be taught level 1 and level 2 and level 3 and level 4 and so on. So they can actually be taught it explicitly. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the stages because you'll have access to the slides as a free download. So don't stress about writing them down. You'll be able to download the slides tomorrow. I want to talk again about ability versus capacity, because there are some new people on tonight, and welcome. It's so good to have you. All right, so this is one of the very most confusing things about kids' behaviour. All right, so some mornings kids can get up and they can just get dressed, no drama at all, and they just do it. And then the next morning they're dragging their behind and you can't get them out of bed, and for love or money you cannot get them to get organised in the morning. But you know they did it yesterday. It's the same for teachers. One day a child will come in and they'll sit on the mat, they'll listen to instructions, they'll go and sit down and they'll write a page of writing, and then the next day they can't get them to do anything. And it is really confusing and it seems very deliberate. But I promise you it's not. What it is that they have that ability to do the task. So if they've developed the ability to do a task, they can do a task. However, what is variable is their emotional capacity any given day to access that ability. Oh dear, I've frozen. Oh, I'm back. Oh dear, that wasn't great.
Your sound's a bit delayed now too, so but we can still hear you.
Okay, well, I'll just keep going. It's very windy outside, and I know the wind shouldn't affect the internet, but anyway, sometimes we'll just keep going. So just understanding that ability versus capacity. We learned a lesson with Luca. Monday mornings were a nightmare. The transition from the weekend to Mondays was not good. We were having big meltdowns Monday morning. And so we went, okay, he really doesn't seem to have the emotional capacity to dress himself on a Monday morning. So it was just a bit of a disaster. So the short story is we started dressing Luca on a Monday morning. Everybody went off and had a good day. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, if he went, I can't dress myself, we kind of went, yeah, we think you can. Because we recognised he actually had the emotional capacity to dress himself. And on a Friday, it was more variable. Now, we just need to lay his clothes out on a Monday for him, and he can then manage the rest. And then Friday, sometimes is not so great. But we've actually built his emotional capacity to access his ability to get himself organised in the day. All right, let's have a look at extreme anxiety. We've got extreme anxiety, and in ADHD, we see oppositional defiance disorder as the representation of extreme anxiety coming from an ADHD neurology. In autism, we see pathological demand avoidance syndrome coming from the autistic neurology. And they both look similar, but they're a bit different. Now, Joanne just raised her hand. Joanne, did you want to put a question in chat? I just saw you raised your hand.
She has. She was asking who teaches skills of theory of mind.
A behaviour therapist, a psychologist, or an occupational therapist who understands theory of mind. Yeah. Good question. So we see these presentations, and if you listen to the pathological demand avoidance syndrome webinar, we go into the differences more between ODD and PDA. But I reckon the next slide says, what is task and demand avoidance? So basically, it's the act of putting more energy into avoiding doing the task than it actually takes to do the task. Now, there's the age appropriate, oh, I can't be bothered, or I don't want to. There's that kind of normal stuff, but you can kind of jolly them along and they'll get on and do what you're asking them to do. But it's that it doesn't matter how much. And so often in ADHD and in ASD, we see that anxiety coming through, and they have maladaptive behaviours that they've developed. So they'll ask the same question over and over again to distract you, or they'll have another question, or they'll argue with you. They'll start a deliberate argument to distract from what you're asking them to do. They'll often be sick. They'll often have a stomach ache. They'll have a headache. They'll have a bone in their leg. They'll have a fingernail. Whatever it is, they will have something that is happening that helps them to avoid a task.
Just a question, Bobbi. Can you have both ODD and PDA?
I guess there's no reason why not. Because you can have ASD and ADHD. PDA is that extreme demand avoidance. ODD doesn't actually really care whether somebody sees them melting down. PDA, they're more likely to save their meltdowns for at home. So an ODD kid will be violent at school. A PDA kid will not be violent at school. They're violent at home. Somebody else just asked a question.
Aisha made a comment. When I realised my child had PDA and was able to respond to the anxiety and demands first, the violence did reduce.
Yeah, that's a good point, And often when kids are being violent, we want to deal with the violence rather than, and we want to stop them hurting us. Of course we do. But it's about saying, I'm wondering what you're really scared about at the moment. Help me to understand what you're worried about so that we can work out what we can do about it.
Yeah. There's a question, is it similar to catastrophizing?
Yes, but it's more than catastrophizing. It's more than that. And I know what I was going to say before. Often kids with ADD and ADHD and ASD get obsessed about things, and they will have an obsession. And sometimes their obsession becomes avoiding what you ask them to do. And so that becomes their obsession and their special interest. And autism can get missed in the diagnosis because they'll often say, oh, does your child have any special interests or obsessions? And you go, nah, they don't line things up, or they don't have a particular special interest, but their obsession and their special interest is actually avoiding demands. So we miss that diagnosis of autism, and that is particularly so in girls. Anything else, Kez?
Janae's just saying that her son has ODD and the doctors think he might also have ADHD too.
Yeah.
Can they have both?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ADHD comes first, and then the extreme anxiety related to the ADHD, so that worrying about things and the fear of getting things wrong and being ashamed because you forget things and you can't get organized and you can't work out your things on your desk, and you know you need your pencil and your ruler and you can't actually remember what the instruction that the teacher gave you, and you get overwhelmed by all of that. That is when you become oppositional, and you see that oppositional defiance disorder happening. So that's kind of that progression there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at the violence continuum. So we've got, and this is kind of the same with PDA as well. It's very similar. So an adult makes a normal request. The child doesn't want to do what they're asked to do. So then there's that normal, I can't be bothered. And then there's the task refusal using violent and aggressive behaviours. So it's seen in ODD, ADHD, PDA, anxiety disorders, ASD, Down syndrome, chromosome disorders. We see this violent and aggressive response, and kids use violence and aggression as their last resort. We think it's their go-to, but they've actually tried a whole lot of things previously and they found them not to be successful. So they know that violence and aggression works. So they default to that because they know it works. Because they've actually tried so many adaptive behaviors before that actually haven't worked for them. And they've spent so much time not being heard. They've said, I can't do their work. They've said it's too much for me. They've said, I want to leave the classroom. They've said, I don't want to go to school. They've actually used their words, but we've just kept, out of the goodness of our own heart and only wanting the best for them, we've actually pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Kez, is there a question there?
There's lots of fantastic comments as we always get, Bobbi. There's just a question too about, is the chromosome test recommended for ODD, and is the test easily obtainable?
You need a pediatrician to actually get that test for you, to order the test. And the entry level ones aren't expensive, but the really complex ones are quite expensive. So you're looking, I'll just be honest, between $600 and $800 for a really good chromosome array. But if it was related to your child's disability and understanding your child's disability, it's not really medical. It's about a disability and understanding a disability. So I'll just leave that thought sit with you. Parents often feel very overwhelmed. They feel really scared of their child and the violence. No one likes to get hurt. It's horrible being hurt. It's horrific having your walls smashed. It's horrific having your precious things broken. It's terrible. We had a $5,500 TV smashed at our house the other day. It sucks. It really sucks. And it feels like they're targeting the things that are really important to you. And it just, we were broken. We were really, really broken. And like, I reckon I know the gig okay-ish. It's hard. It is really, really, really hard. And then we react from fear. And then when we actually lose it and they laugh about it, it's just devastating because we miscue the laughter. And then they kind of go, oh, well, that's over and done with. And then they want to sit down with you, have a chat with you, be your pally. And they go, well, why are you rejecting me? Why don't you want to spend time with me? Why don't you want to talk to me? I'm here. I'm available now. I actually feel okay now because I can see you understand how upset I was. And then we reject them just out of self-protection. We try and tag off with each other. So if one of us is feeling really hurt and really wounded by the behaviour, we try and protect the other parent. But I know a lot of you are single parents and you don't have that backup and you just cop the brunt of it all. And I remember being that single parent. with Luca's dad, and I copped the brunt of it, and I felt broken for a lot of years. And yeah, it's just horrible. There's no other way around it. All right. So let's look at some management strategies and some different kind of management strategies. So if we are looking at a classic ASD or ADHD child, we would say firm boundaries, praise, structure and routine, rewards and consequences. And that will work for straight ASD and straight ADHD. Those things work well. If you've got PDA and ODD, we need to look at a different approach. It's got to be person-centered, so it's got to be centered on who they are. Lots of negotiation, lots of collaboration, and lots of flexibility. Now, there is a sequence that I'm going to show you in a minute, and it's called PANDA. It's being developed by the PDA Society of the UK, and we're going to talk you through that because it actually does give you a bit of a process to follow. Kez.
So is there any difference in how this violence is enacted between the males and female? I.e., male acting out externally on others and females internally, for example, hitting themselves or holding their breath?
I think it's not gender specific. No, it is not gender specific. Some internalize, some externalize. And we don't necessarily label that internalized behavior as a meltdown, but it is much a meltdown as externalized behavior. So we'll see that self-harm, we'll see that disordered eating, that the holding the breath, the hitting self, the trichotillomania, like the pulling out the hair, that internalized self-harm behavior is as much a meltdown as what smashing a wall is. We just don't recognize it in the same way.
Yeah. There's a question about how you diagnose PDA.
Yeah. There is an assessment tool that is available in the PDA Society's handbook for therapists and teachers. So there is an assessment tool available in that. And that whole document, PDA for therapists and teachers, is available for free to download from their website.
Our lovely Aisha's already got the link.
So there you go. You can click on it, download it. The assessment tool is there. In Australia, PDA is not well recognised. It's an actual standalone diagnosis in the UK, but it's not here in Australia. The NDIS recognises PDA, so it's autism level 2 with a PDA profile, or autism whatever level it is with a PDA profile. So if you've got a child who's got autism level 1 and you've been told that you cannot access the NDIS, but they've got extreme anxiety, and you do the PDA assessment tool, and you get both and you send them both back in, they will consider the function component of that ASD level 1 with a PDA profile. Because I know a lot of people who've got kids with the extreme anxiety can't get the NDIS, and that's a real barrier for getting support.
Yeah. Holly makes a comment that possibly a lot of ODD diagnosis in Australia would actually be PDA.
I agree, Holly, you're right. Yep. And I would say your kids are more PDA than ODD, Holly. Just saying. That's a conversation for another time. All right. Now, so this is the PDA Society's tool, and they let everybody use this. So they're very generous with the information, and it's just go round and round and round, and you jump on and you jump off. So it's really picking your battles is really important, because some battles just aren't worth picking. Anxiety management, so speaking to the anxiety first always. I would be looking at anxiety medication. I used to be totally anti-medication, and I would hate to say that I'm fully pro-medication, but I'm certainly a lot more pro-medication than I ever used to be. Just because I've seen the internal breaking and the horror that they go through in their self-esteem when they just can't access the tools in the moment. I think one of the most frustrating things with these kids is they're clever kids. They're highly, highly intelligent kids. They can tell you 4, 7, 8 breathing. They can tell you wiggle your toes. They can tell you go for a walk outside. They can recite a book of strategies when they're calm, but when their emotional tank is empty, they've got no emotional capacity to access any of their ability to find a tool. The difference that medication makes is it actually increases their emotional capacity to access a tool when they're starting to get anxious. That's all the medication does. It just buys them that little bit of time to access a tool and not feel shamed and like a failure. Because then when they're in their recovery phase after a meltdown, then they go into that shame and I'm so terrible. I know how to do this. I don't know why I do it. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Because when they're melting down, they lose all of their protective behavior and they break stuff. They break stuff that is precious to them, to other people. They hurt people that they love, and they damage things that are really important to them. And then they go into that extreme shame and remorse, which then often leads to that internalizing self-harming behavior, which is another meltdown again. So they go out of the externalizing meltdown to an internalizing meltdown. So it's just going around and just starting at anxiety, negotiate and collaborate, reduce the demand. Just reduce the demand as much as you can and disguise them. So I wonder if, or could you do this with me, or can we do it together? Or I'm not up for that today. We're just not doing it. And just working with them around that stuff. So it's just a helpful tool.
Just a question. How do you talk to the anxiety?
Okay. So a lot of I wonder if. So don't talk to the anxiety in the middle of a meltdown. It's too late. Ride it through. So it's the middle of the meltdown isn't the time to have a conversation with the anxiety for the first time. Okay. The first time you have that conversation with the anxiety is when they're calm and quiet. And you go, look, I've just been doing some learning. I've heard this information. I'm wondering if sometimes this is what is happening for you. I wonder if sometimes you get really overwhelmed and you get really scared. And then once you get overwhelmed and scared, you don't know what to do. And then you get more overwhelmed and more scared because you can see I'm getting upset and getting stressed and you don't know what to do. And then you have a big meltdown and we end up things not going well. And I'm wondering if that's what's going on. And you might be very surprised. Now, that is not going to stop the meltdown straight away. And it will be supporting them to understand that and getting them somebody who understands PDA to work with them and support them, or somebody who really gets that demand avoidant, or that the antecedent to violence is always anxiety. It is always anxiety. And we think that they go from 0 to 1,000,000 in 2 seconds. But no, they're actually at 999,999. And that's where they travel at that heightened stress level all of the time. And they're actually just doing a bit of a blip. It's just because they're up here so high already, the blip is extraordinary.
Yeah. Lots and lots of comments, Bobbi, as you can well imagine.
Yes. And
Yeah.
be supported by those comments. And did you know, guys, you can save those comments? So if you go into chat, I'll just go into chat now so I can explain to you how to do it. And it says to the hosts and panelists, and if you go across to the right, there's a little page. There's a smiley face for the emoticons, and then there's 3 little dots. If you click on those little dots, you can save the chat. So before you log off tonight, you might want to save the chat, because then it'll come up as a notebook on your computer, because there'll be links and comments and ideas there that you might want to try. So I'll go out of that again. All right.
I am also putting the links in the website, the webinar replay page too. So don't stress if you can't download the chat or anything. Everything will be on the website along with the recording and the slides. So don't worry, it's all there. It's hard enough listening and participating.
Yeah. And tomorrow this will be up on the website. So if you feel like you've missed it, or the kids have played up and you've only heard part of it, don't worry, you can go back and listen to it again. And if you've got support workers that are actually supporting your kids, you can actually ask them to listen to certain webinars. And when they've listened to them, they can get paid an hour for listening to them. So we actually pay all of our support workers to listen to the webinars. So when a new support worker starts with us, they've got to listen to the webinars as part of their induction. And so we now, our support workers are recognised in our region as being good with challenging behaviours. And they do shadow shifts. And so you could be in a different area and you could actually request that your support workers listen to these webinars, and they can be paid to actually listen to them from your core support. All right, so minimize rules, explain reasons, pick battles. So this is the P of Panda. Enable some choice and control, and accept that some things just can't be done. So if you've got a child who's in total school refusal, trying to get them to school just isn't going to happen, because there's a whole lot of other stuff going on that you've got to deal with if they're at that school refusal point. So just accepting that you're not going to get them to school is kind of sometimes really helpful. So your anxiety management, reduce uncertainty, think ahead, recognize that the anxiety is underlying, and treat meltdowns as a panic attack and support them through a meltdown and move on. I think we need to actually do a whole webinar on meltdowns and the process of meltdowns, and actually the build up, at what point you can change what's happening, and then the recovery process. And I think we'll do a whole one on meltdown. So Aisha, can you remember that for me? Because I'm likely to get off. And
I've already written it in our form.
So Aisha helps plan the webinars, and she helps us with all the advertising, and she's amazing with that. Then we've got negotiation and collaboration. So keeping calm is actually really important during the process. The only time that you actually need to get a bit heightened and match the level of emotion is if they're really starting to escalate. But that's a bit of a higher order skill, and I would suggest that you have support from somebody if you're going to start matching their level of escalation. But if you do it early enough, you can bring it down. So if they're starting to say things like, "You don't understand," and you can go, I can see that you don't think I understand. You're right. I don't understand. Explain it to me. I'm listening. But you're still regulated because you're actually making a choice to match intensity. Because then they experience that empathy straight away. You're not dysregulated, you're not heightened, and you're not cross. You're just matching intensity. And that makes a huge difference. Disguise and manage demands. So word and position requests indirectly, constantly monitoring their emotional capacity on a day. So being very aware of windows of tolerance and knowing when they're going to shatter. But you already know that stuff. You are the world expert in your kids. All I'm doing is giving you some different coat hangers to hang what you already know off and reframing it to make it safer for you and your kids. Doing things together really helps because they get so overwhelmed. And often when you're starting to move through this process, you cannot see their bedroom floor. Everything is a mess. Everything is just in total overwhelm and chaos. And you might even say to them, look, would you just go and get 10 moldy plates out of your bedroom, please? Just 10. I know that you've got 35 moldy plates in your bedroom because we've got no plates left in our cupboard. Can you just go and find 10 for me? They actually can't do that. If you say, would you just go and get one cup that has got all Milo stuck to it that is dried hard like cement because I really want to have a cup of coffee and we haven't got a single cup left in the house. They actually can't do that. That is actually too overwhelming a request. You don't want to just go in there and get it, but hey mate, there's no cups left and I'm really wanting a cuppa. How about you and I go together into your bedroom and we'll grab 2 cups and bring them out and we'll wash those up and I'll make a coffee and I'll make a Milo for you. And so then that actually opens the door for then going in, okay, all right, we've got a cup out each. It would be great if we could get back in there together and get a couple of more cups. How about I grab a bucket out of the laundry and we'll go in together and we'll just fill the bucket up together of dirty dishes. And I know that you know that I know that you know that that's actually what it can be like. We know. It can be moldy, it can be smelly, it can be rotten. I found a stash of apples behind Luca's bookcase the other day. I couldn't work out what the smell in the room was. Ugh. Yes, Karen?
Yeah, wow. Okay. There's just so many great comments, and it's just that I'm kind of cherry picking, Bobbi, so that, yeah. So
all the time.
Yeah, what do we do? Like, what do you do if you try to be flexible and collaborate and it just doesn't work?
Yep.
And what happens if mum's has a panic attack in the middle of dealing with all of this?
Yeah, I know, right? You need to go and get some meds yourself. I'm sorry. If you're having panic attacks and you can't manage it, and if you're already on meds, up your meds. And get to Cara Gateway and get yourself some counselling. Just so that you can manage it. It is reasonable that you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It is reasonable that you feel like you're a victim of family violence from your kids. It's reasonable that you feel traumatized.
Yeah.
What's Alex got to say?
Oh, where's that one?
Alex raised their hand.
So I've got 2. Hang on. Oh, sorry. I've got
That's all right. Put it in the Q&A, Alex.
I've just got to get the right one.
No worries. I'll just keep going and come back because there's only like 1, 2, 3 more slides. So we're nearly there. If you have to go, I totally understand. It's fine. I'm sorry. I try really hard to keep it to an hour. Adaptation. So have a plan B, allow plenty of time, be flexible where you can, and try humor, distraction, novelty, and role play. Like really, it's trying to approach it softly and gently, but it's really, really hard. Did you find the question, Kez?
Just someone saying you're amazing. So there's a couple of those.
Oh, bless you.
So much to learn. And
I know.
yeah.
I am learning all of the time, guys. All the time I'm learning. And I don't get it right all the time. I promise you, I do not get it right. That's why we've got smashed laptops and TVs, because I don't get it right all the time. Okay, I want to talk about one of the most serious demands that does kids' heads in, and it's praise. Now, we think we should be praising our kids, but there's an implied demand in praise, and there's an implied demand in success and being able to do something. There's an implied demand in actually having enough capacity to access your ability one day. Okay, so an adult makes a request. The child manages their anxiety and they comply. Parent is excited. You're thrilled. Of course you're thrilled. You're having a party that they actually cleaned their bedroom up, or they bought out a bucket of cups with you, that they engaged with you. Of course you're excited. So you praise them and say, that's amazing. Now, the child might freeze or explode from the praise, right? They might just get overwhelmed by the praise. You settle the child and you kind of move on. But you're confused. Day 2. You've been able to get one bucket of cups out. So rather than taking a bucket because you've been successful, you take a washing basket. Because you think, okay, we can get everything out of the room now. So you go, okay, it was great how we got that bucket of cups out of your room yesterday. Now, I've bought the washing basket because today we're going to do the plates. And they go, you? They just have a huge meltdown because their small success that they managed to have with you yesterday now becomes this whole huge thing that they just can't cope with. And then you re-request and you praise and, oh, but it was so good yesterday and it felt so nice being successful together. Child melts down more. The child shuts down and refuses to comply. And so then we go into bribing, manipulating, corruption, yelling, screaming, and then the child will become violent. Now, if they're in public, they'll smile sweetly if they've got PDA and just say, no, thank you. And then when they get home, they'll lose it, and then you'll cop it then. So praise is just, please don't. I know it's totally counterintuitive. So if they do a bucket of cups, don't praise them. Don't make a big fuss out of it. Just go, oh yeah, good. But don't go back the next day to get more cups. Maybe a week later. You've got to pace it out really slowly. Now, just some resources. Your GP, pediatrician, psychiatry. Here in Ballarat, we've got a program called Step Up, which is run by our Child and Family Services program. It's an early intervention, federal court funded program. So it may not be called Step Up in your area, but I can guarantee you that there's a youth, child, family violence prevention program that is funded everywhere in Australia. And it's a program that works both with the child and the parent. Orange Door is your gateway now in most of Australia to access support services. There's the police if you have to, and there are intervention orders if you have to. There's Cara Gateway for your own support, and I really would encourage you to go to Cara Gateway. But just a word of advice about Cara Gateway, they are really, really busy. If you ring them, don't wait on hold. We actually did an experiment and my business manager rang them and waited on hold just to see how long it would take. So she just kind of put the phone on hold and just waited. An hour and 36 minutes she waited until somebody picked up the phone. And they said, please tell your families, do not wait on hold. Press option 2, leave your name and phone number, and they'll get back to you within 48 hours. Now, the Cara Gateway process isn't easy. I know that sounds nuts. It goes to a central intake where they take all of your information and they ask you what you want right then at intake. And 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have a clue. So, say you want some counselling because you're overwhelmed, you want some cleaning or gardening or some respite, or you just want to know how to manage things a bit better. It doesn't really matter what you say then, it's just a form they're filling in. So don't stress about what you say. Just say whatever comes to mind or write down a couple of things before you get on that phone because you know they're going to ask it. Then what they do from that central intake is they send it out to their local provider. So in Ballarat Health Services are the local provider for Cara Gateway. So everywhere around Australia, because it's a federally funded program, there is Cara Gateway. And they will link you, so they will send your intake form to the Cara Gateway provider in your region. Then you'll get another intake phone call from that agency who will do their own intake process. Then you will get a phone call from a family support worker who will go through a Cara star with you to work out what your needs are, and then you will get allocated some support. I just think it's important to understand that process. And that brings me to the end. I'm sorry I've gone over everyone, but I just really wanted you to get that, how to get help information. And look, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer if there's more questions, Karen.
Okay, they're just asking what's the eligibility criteria to be accepted by Cara Gateway?
You have to be caring for a child who's got a disability, behaviour issues, a medical condition, challenging behaviours, be caring for somebody who is elderly. So be caring for a parent, a partner with mental health issues. They do young carer as well. So siblings who have got carer roles, who are really stressed by their caring roles as well. It's actually very broad and quite inclusive. Anything else that needs to be covered?
Just some amazing, comments as always, and just a few questions that we really can't answer right now. I think it's probably good that we save these and, we refer to them later on.
Yeah, okay.